Before there were spotlights, there were stars. And before there were stars, there was pressure. Light is not soft. It is a force forged in fire. And some of us learned early that if we wanted light, we had to generate our own electricity. We turned silence into signals. We turned doubt into voltage. We turned rooms that were not made or built for us into launch pads for our becoming. Pressure does not crush stars, it ignites them. And nebulas have never once asked for permission to shine. Life is not just about escape. Our life is a declaration. Afrofuturism is not a costume, it is intergalactic calibration. As memory meets imagination, power is born. Power to build futures like blueprints. Power for us to architect what comes next. And fabric that refuses to behave, drip down in unmatched swagger. Everywhere we go, we show up fabulous. We say, baby, I have seen my tomorrow and it looks pretty fabulous on me. They say when the aliens come, they'll yell, take me to your leader. Because, of course, our brilliance can only be extraterrestrial. Take me to your leader. Because, of course, our achievements can only have come from outer space. Well, let me tell you, this leader did not descend, she assembled. Piece by piece, brick by brick, choice by choice. We choose to glow. We choose to shine. We choose to imagine a future so bright the world has no option but to adjust to us. The light we are looking for is already in us, waiting for the opportunity to go full voltage. So right now, we test spark theory. We are not just wearing light. We are light.
Welcome back to another episode of the Brown Sugar Cafe podcast, the place where poetry meets conversation. I'm your host, Terrence P. Elmore. And before we get into today's topic, make sure you hit that plus sign so you don't miss an episode. Also, please subscribe to my blog, thebrownssugarcafe.blog. And if you find any value in this episode or any other episodes, make sure you leave a heartfelt review. So with that being said, let's get to it. Wow. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Tifara Brown. I am the owner and creative director of Honeysuckle Poetry. I am a poet, a librettist, a writer, and author, and my work is informed by oral history, storytelling, and cultural and community engagement. So I'm very, very excited to be here at the Brown Sugar Cafe.
Thank you for coming on. Man, how have you been?
I have been, wow, I've been great. I've been drenched in joy and gratitude. It's been a busy season for writing and for poetry and for storytelling, and so I'm very blessed to be in the middle of all of it.
Oh, man, that piece you opened up with, where was the inspiration for that?
I wrote it for an event. The Cincinnati Opera Young Professionals Group had an Afrofuturist fashion show called Bacchanal Future Glow. And it was inspired by the opera that I've written for Cincinnati Opera called Lalo Vavi, which is an Afrofuturist opera. So Bacchanal Future Glow was one of the community engagement events inspired by Lalo Vavi. So we had designers, Black designers, create these Afro-futurist inspired pieces, gorgeous colors and shapes and It was an incredible experience to have so many people, many of whom had never experienced spoken word, never experienced Afrofuturism, got to have this immersive experience, and I wrote Spark Theory for that event.
Okay, wow. So, Afrofuturism, for those who may not know what that is, could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so essentially, Afrofuturism is a paradigm. It's a frame of mind where we imagine futures through an Afrocentric lens. So Afrofuturism is a vehicle to imagine solutions in science, art, literature, fashion, all of these things that essentially build civilizations. When we talk about Afrofuturism, there is a lens where we come together and start to architect what does our future look like in all of these things. But specifically, we do it through the perspective of African, Caribbean, and Black centered culture.
Okay, yeah, man, I'm a big fan of Afrofuturism,
Yeah,
so yeah, I'm really digging that. I really love that poem you opened up with.
thank you.
We were talking earlier, and you mentioned that you are writing, creating the opera yourself.
Hmm.
Could you please tell us about that?
Yes. So this summer, this Cincinnati Opera will be debuting the first in a series of three operas for the Black Opera Project. So the opera I wrote is called Lalo Vavi, and Lalo Vavi is the Tut word for love. And Lalo Vavi is an Afro-futurist opera. It's set 400 years in the future and is centered around the life of a young woman named Persephone. And Persephone is the daughter of the ruler of a place known as Atlas, which was formerly known as Atlanta. And in Atlas, a power is giving out based on the presence of this genetic code called Syndica. So all of the citizens of Atlas are tested, and the more Syndica that they have in their blood, the higher in the caste system they are. Now, Titan, who is Persephone's father and the ruler of Atlas, has been on a hundreds of years search for a variation of Syndica known as the Tree of Life gene, which he knows if it is extracted can give the extractor eternal life. So Persephone is found to have the Tree of Life gene and is betrayed by Titan and has to run for her life. And so she goes on this epic journey into her past to find out who exactly she is, to step into her power, and then eventually liberate herself and liberate the people of Atlas.
Wow. That man, I'm that sounds really, really interesting. How did you come up with that concept?
So it's an amazing story. So I got the opportunity. My alma mater is the University of Georgia. So I graduated from there in 2017, and I got the opportunity to go back to UGA to do a workshop with their chamber music ensemble in the School of Music. So I did a poetry workshop with them because many of these world-class musicians had never experienced poetry before. They'd never been to an open mic. They had heard of spoken word, but they never actually experienced it. So I got to do a storytelling workshop with them and then do a full poetry set with them so they could, have that experience. And the composer of Lalo Vavi, his name is Dr. Kevin Day. He was in that class at the time he was getting his master's. So we connected because he had just composed a chamber piece that had a spoken word element to it. And so he shared that with me and we connected, and this was in the spring of 2022. No, actually, this is 2021. He called me later that summer and told me that he had got the opportunity to compose an opera with the Cincinnati Opera through this project called the Black Opera Project. And he asked if I would be the librettist, which the librettist is the person who writes the libretto, which is the opera script. And so that's how I got the opportunity. Now, I actually wrote a story that was rooted in my experience growing up in rural Southern Georgia. I'm the daughter of two music ministers, and I mean, I grew up on a dirt road and a cow pasture and a pecan orchard. And that
Okay.
that was my experience
Yeah.
growing up in the deep South. I actually grew up about 5 minutes, a 5-minute drive from where the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, got captured by the Union Army. I used to play at a playground there.
Wow.
So that was, that's that deep Southern rooted experience is informs a lot of my art. And so I actually wrote an opera that was based in that experience, and I mean I feel like it was sincere, but there was something, and I know you understand this as a poet. There's a point when you're writing where the poem settles in you, and you know it's done, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I hadn't felt that settling yet, with the story that I'd written. So our director, her name is Camille Howard. We were having a conversation, myself, our composer, and Camille, and she said, "What if we allowed ourselves to dream?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "We never have the opportunity to escape. This is a Black opera project. When we talk about Black stories, or really what is given media attention, where do we have the opportunity to see ourselves in fantastical worlds, doing fantastical things?" And this was, again, we were having this conversation in 2022. And so I went home and I took off my blinders, and I thought about all of the beautiful other worlds and universes that I'd read in books and movies and plays, and I brought all of those things together, and I didn't censor myself based on, is this gonna be possible? I didn't know if it would be possible yet. But if it was possible, this is what I would wanna see on stage. This is the kind of story I wish I had growing up, and then Lalo Vavi came out of that.
Wow. Okay, so you touched on my next question. Growing up in the South, how did you get started with poetry?
Yeah, so like I said, my both of my parents are music ministers. So I grew up. My dad was a church musician, and my mother usually would direct the choirs of the churches that I grew up in. So, but they would encourage me, even as a young person. I mean, as early as 7 or 8 years old, I would have these dreams, these very vivid dreams, and I would write them down, and I would read them in church. They give me an opportunity as a young girl, to get up in front of my church and talk about my dreams and talk about my visions, and then my mother was an English teacher, so she would share books with me. So we had a good library at home. So I would read at home and I would read at school, and so I would find poems that just moved me, and I would get the opportunity to read them at school. And then as I got older, I got into this organization known as 4-H. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah, I
4-H.
am.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I did 4-H from fifth grade all the way until I was state president my senior year of high school.
Wow.
And so I got into performance, in the performing arts part of 4-H, and I got into poetry totally by accident because I actually wanted to do interpretive dance when I started doing regional competitions.
Yeah.
But I had this was about 3 days before my first ever competition. My 4-H agent at the time came to my school to tell me that the dance that I did for her, she felt was too um, intense for the 4-H stage, and I would have to find something else to do, and we were leaving in 48 hours.
Wow.
So I remember I was at the 4-H office, and I was just tearing my hair out, like, I don't what am I going to do? So I was just scrolling on YouTube, and I found, um, a spoken word artist. I don't know if you might be familiar with him. His name is Shane Koiksan. Um,
Nah.
yeah, he I heard a poem of his, and it was about Beethoven. And he wrote this incredibly vivid, powerful piece about Beethoven's genius, really just peering into his mind, and the pain that he had to endure to become the genius that he was. And that spoke to me, and I learned that poem in less than a day, and I performed it. I performed that, at that regional competition. I think I got, like, I don't know, maybe 2nd or 3rd place or something,
Wow.
but I knew at that point, I was like, "Okay, something's happened here, because there's really no reason where I could I could be in this situation, learn a poem in a day, and actually place."
Right.
To me, that was like, okay, I feel that there was something in me that maybe I just hadn't discovered yet. And so I took it all the way. And from that point on, this was my 8th grade year. I did spoken word, I did poetry. I won state competition, doing performance poetry. And I had also played my saxophone. So I put these pieces together. And then when I went to college in 2013, I went to UGA, and that's when I started writing original poetry. Like my own, just from my heart. Not uh covering anybody else's poetry.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this for real. So that was my journey into poetry.
I would have never guessed that. I would have never. Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. That is I'm speechless. Just wow. That is the most unique story that I've ever heard about how somebody started with poetry.
Seriously?
Yes.
It's crazy because this is my life now. It's it always I'm always moved when I tell that story because, like I said, I grew up. I grew up in, like, a 2 stoplight town, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was very small, cow pasture kinda thing, and, we didn't have open mics. That just wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
I didn't even attend my first open mic until I was in college. That's when I started, when I was looking for poetry events in Athens, and I was like, "Oh my gosh," like, there are these coffee shops that do, these weekly open mic nights, and that was my first time. Even though I'd been performing, this was my first time actually, getting up in front of, a room of strangers at a coffee shop, and then I started getting into that scene. But that again, I was a grown woman before I even had that experience. Like, we didn't have anything like that where I grew up.
Wow. And I saw your TEDx on
Mhm.
YouTube.
Yeah.
How did that opportunity come about?
Well, TEDx UGA is, I mean, it's a scene. It's a huge party every year at Georgia, and I just I'm trying to remember how I heard about it. I was involved in student government, pretty heavy, at Georgia, and I think I heard about TEDx, through, through, SGA. I either knew some people that were applying for it, and they said, "Tafara, I you do your poetry, man, you should write a TED Talk." And, I was familiar with TED, but I said, what, Ted does poetry? So and then I started to do the research and I was like, wow, this is a real thing. And I I had done workshops before, with people about the power of poetry and how, it's so interesting that people will love poetry without not even understanding, where I guess the history of it, especially when we talk about spoken word and Black oral storytelling. I mean, we have a millennia or more of history, when that's informing this our performance in poetry. And I realized people didn't know that. They didn't know about the griots of West Africa. They never heard that before. They didn't know that, we had thousands of years of oral storytelling before anybody ever wrote down any of the poems. So I put all of that together in a talk. I said because I actually spent a semester semester I graduated at that point, but I spent about 6 months in Ghana, in Accra. I was at the Kofi Annan Peacekeeping, and Training Center, and I was doing some workshops, some security and peace building workshops there. I got a grant from the University of Georgia, from the Office of the President, to spend time over there. So I learned so much of my history. I actually got to go to the slave castles on the coast and just had this out of body experience, of all of the history that I had learned just right there in front of me. And, so I talked about that. I talked about the griots. I talked about, oral storytelling and history, but then I also talked about there are present day benefits and power that comes from poetry and from mental health, benefits and community engagement. I wanted to basically pull a thread from, yes, this is generations of history and it's relevant to, our issues and how we live our life today.
One of the things that you said during the talk that really stuck out to me, when you were finished with the piece, that you said that spoken word or writing down something is good for healing.
Yes.
The poem is The Businesswoman Mistaken for a Prostitute.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it, man, like I want people to go check it out because I don't want to give, but
No, I know,
like,
I know, they can no, I
yeah,
want I want people to know 'cause I said about healing because, I mean, that was that poem that I shared at the beginning of the TED Talk, that was my desperate attempt to heal from that traumatic experience. I was in Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama. This was my first internship, my first, technology internship, because that's what I was studying in school, and this was my first time really away from home. I mean, I didn't know anybody. I mean, I'm just a small town girl with a big girl job, and, had my work that day. We were staying at the West End Hotel, beautiful, beautiful hotel in, downtown Birmingham, and, I was 19 at the time, so I couldn't even drink, so but I went to the bar with my colleagues because I wanted to be social and, get to know who I
yeah,
was working with, and I asked the bartender for a soda, and as I'm standing there waiting for a soda, this older gentleman, assumed, that I was, soliciting sex, and that's why I was at the hotel, and, now I'm saying I have a briefcase, I have a blouse and black slacks, all, so it's clear that I'm in,
right.
business casual or however, but, he asked, what I wanted with him, like what was I looking for? And, I got very angry, I said, "Nothing. I'm not," I wasn't even paying attention to him. And, then he got really flushed and embarrassed and was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought," And I had to stay very close to my team. They didn't even hear him. Nobody in
Wow.
that bar or restaurant heard him but me. So they're sitting, my colleagues are watching something on their phone and everyone's laughing and I'm sitting there because this man is staring me down. And I'm 100% sure if I would have left alone, he would have followed me out.
Yeah.
And I was terrified, and then I was embarrassed and just disgusted all at the same time because and then I go through what was it? Like, I was standing there breathing. Why did this man assume I wanted to have sex with him? And again, this was my first time away from home, so I'm already kind of in knots, and all of that just kinda came crashing down on me at the same time. And then I have to show up the next day, professional, ready to go, and all of those things. So I wrote that poem, Lost and Found, because that's exactly how I felt. I felt lost, and I didn't feel found. I didn't process what had happened and actually be able to talk about it without getting angry or breaking down until I finished that poem, until I felt like I could. I felt like I wrote in the poem what I wanted to say to him, but I felt like he had taken my voice in that moment. I didn't know what to say, and I think that angered me more than anything, and so I wrote Lost and Found, as a way to give that voice back to that girl that had lost it. And I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me after I've performed that poem and said, "Oh my gosh, I thought nobody understood." Whatever violence they had endured, and they kept it to themselves or had been silent. They said, "Your poem, this is the first time where I actually feel like I can breathe and I can heal from what happened to me." And that's the beauty and the power of art and poetry.
It truly is because I am a firm believer that, our experiences are not just for us, but for us to help other people.
Absolutely.
And in any way that we can, where we feel comfortable enough to share with others, we're helping them. And
Yes.
so I'm so glad that that horrible moment turned into something healing. For anybody listening, it's on the YouTube. I'll put the link in the description, but I was just like, wow, because there's a TED Talk and then there's another video I found with you doing it. It has like a maroon color background, I think. And I was just like, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, these are
yeah,
these are very old videos now.
yeah, they are. Yeah, I had a huge afro.
Yes.
This is back in my afro days. Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, I had a church friend who did filmmaking, and he also had never experienced poetry before. And he heard me do a poem at church actually, and it came up to me and said, my mind is blown. I do film, I do video production. Do you have any videos of you performing? And I said, no, I don't. And so he did that for me. And I was able to use that, to share that video whenever I did my workshops, talking to people about storytelling and all of that. Yeah.
Okay, so we're about close on time now.
Hmm.
So we have to do this again. We have to do this again.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
uh, any final words or anything you want to share before I let you get out of here?
I'm grateful that it is always refreshing to sit down with other artists and other poets especially to talk about, what's happening in our craft, what's inspiring us, and, just being reminded of how relevant our art is. So I'm just grateful to be in community with you, and I'm thankful that you thought enough of me and my poetry and art to invite me onto your podcast. I definitely hope we get to do this again.
Oh, we will. We have to put it on the books. Real quick, let the people know how they can contact you,
Yeah.
any information.
So my website is my first name, last name, TifaraBrown.com. My Instagram is at Tifara Brown. You can find all of my art and poetry on my website, and all of the information about the opera Lalo Vavi, which will be debuting on the 9th of July in Cincinnati, Ohio, at the Cincinnati Music Hall. All of that information is also on my website and my Instagram.
Okay, well, thank you again for taking the time out. Everybody, the information will be in the show description. And remember, as always, keep pushing forward.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Brown Sugar Cafe podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Terrence P. Elmore, and this is the place where poetry meets conversation. Hit that follow button and turn on your notifications so you won't miss an episode. Check out my blog, thebrownsugarcafe.blog. Also connect with me on Instagram at The Brown Sugar Cafe. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, remember, keep pushing forward.